Today on OnlyFans, Computer Tech and More, we're going to be taking a revisit on the Lian-Li SL-120V2 fan. This was one of the first fans that I took a look at in my original analysis reviews, and a couple things have changed since I originally took a look at it. I've improved my whole testing process, and I've improved the way I collect noise data. So let's go ahead and take a new look at the Lian-Li SL-120V2. This is part of my redone series where I redid all my noise testing analysis. Let's get right into it. So before we get into a lot of detail, I just want to do a little bit of a explanation as to what's going on in this video and then what I would like to do in the future. So right now in this video, I redid my whole noise testing analysis. Now the old method isn't completely invalid, but I found it to be less consistent, a range of plus or minus 4 decibels. So that's an 8 decibel range in total. The new testing methodology gives me a plus or minus 2 decibel range, which gives a 4 decibel range total. So overall, improving my accuracy. Unfortunately, in order to get to the next level in my testing, I do need help from, well, viewers like you. So hitting that subscribe button will get me a long way. Sponsorships is another way that can get me propelled further. And or joining me on Patreon will get me there. And the reason for this is I want to buy a dedicated microphone for noise testing, which is $250. I want to get an upgraded anemometer, something that is substantially more accurate. It's around $500. I want to build a small little chamber for just doing my noise testing part of the tests, which I will build myself, but you know that I have to buy the materials cost, and that does take time. And I want to build a dedicated test system for running my channel as opposed to just trying to jerry-rig my gaming PC, because I also want to get into doing a little bit of light cooler testing as a comparative level kind of to it. So I'd really appreciate if you all would take a look at my Patreon and consider joining it. It would really go a long way in pushing me to get to that goal for this channel. Now, as I did previously mention, the previous testing methodology isn't completely invalid. It's just not for the wide range of scenarios I actually want to test. So I placed my microphone really close to the fan itself because I'm just testing my home office, 30 decibel plus noise floor. So I figured putting the microphone close to the fan, I would only pick up the fan noise. Unfortunately, I was getting, I believe, a lot of air noise, as well as I think in some cases I was getting interference between the blades and the microphone itself, causing particular spikes in the noise value. So the test scenario that this is actually good at representing is if you had a mesh filter directly over the fan, you're going to get extra noise because the filter is right over the blades. It's also represented for the case where the fan is in a pull configuration on a heatsink fin stack or on a radiator. Now, depending on the radiator, what kind of spacing you're talking about, meaning the distance between the blades and the next piece. So if they're too close to each other, they cause interference and can cause either a high pitch or low pitch humming sound that can be fairly unpleasant on the ear. So that's the test scenario that my old testing methodology kind of looked at. The new one places the microphone a fixed distance away from the fan, and we're taking measurements that way. I have an actual pole that I'm using to make sure I get the consistent distance every single time as opposed to taking a tape measure to it. But that's the way we're going to be doing it going forward. And just for case in point, so we have comparative. So if you're new to this channel, I encourage you to watch the second part of this video where I actually go over each of the tests, why they're important, how we're looking at the data, how to use the data, that kind of thing. If you're returning to this channel, this is a broad overview of this is where it was, this is where we are now, and this is where we are going to be going forward, just as a general chart as opposed to graphs. All right, let's get into the charts. Okay, first up, how do we read these graphs? Well, we've got the fan ranking. It'll be on both of them, the model, the RPM, and the airspeed. On 100% PW fan signal, there will also be the noise level the fan generated at that peak. So, first up is the Uni-Fan SL-120V2. Originally, it was ranked 43rd. It is now ranked 10th in noise normalized results through my CPU air cooler. So that is a huge jump in, well, performance gain. And this is where I went into why I think it was particularly noisy, is that its blades are just so close to the edge of the frame. So again, the interference, and would have the same sort of result when put in a pull configuration on a heatsink like the U12A, which is what I use for my testing. So particularly just noisy there. But overall a great improvement. Okay, at 100% PWM fan signaling through the CPU air cooler, it was ranked 22nd. It retains that position at 22nd. In value proposition for the CPU air cooler, noise normalized, it was ranked 48th. It is ranked 36th, so an improvement there. But the fan is so expensive, so there's not much change overall. At 100% PWM fan signaling, it retains its position at 45th. CFM testing, noise normalized, it was ranked 33rd. It is now ranked 3rd. So that is a great performance improvement. At 100% CFM, or PWM fan signaling, it's ranked 18th overall, value proposition. CFM test, noise normalized, it was ranked 47th. It is now ranked 31st. CFM value proposition, 100% PWM fan signaling, it was ranked 42nd. It retains that position. As 6-inch noise normalized to my case simulation test, it was ranked 37th. It is now ranked 18th, so an overall great uplift in performance there. At the 11-inch mark, it was ranked 36th. It is now ranked 24th, so a small uptick in performance there. Value proposition 6-inch mark, noise normalized, case simulation test, it was ranked 47th. It is now ranked 41st, so a small improvement there. At the 11-inch mark, noise normalized, case simulation test, it was ranked 43rd. It is now ranked 34th. All right, now we're going to get into the specific test. First specific test is my case simulation test. In this test, I took key measurements at various locations, so the 6, 9, 11, and 14.5 inch marks, which are representative of where your CPU air cooler for a thin stack would be on different size cases. So first up is the 6-inch mark. This would be a small form factor case that is still a front to back airflow, not the ultra compact ones like the Fractal, is it Terra case, where the air is sucked in from the sides and blown out the top, or sucked in from the bottom, blown out the top. That isn't what this test is. It's a front to back airflow style small form factor case. Now, if you are looking at the ultra compact ones, you're going to want to get a fan that is better in pressure scenarios, meaning one that's better at blowing air through obstructions. So you'd actually want to look closer at the data for the CPU air cooler and the CFM testing. That'll give you a good indication of what fans would be good in that sort of application. The 6-inch mark is also very representative for a short throw distance. Good representation of this would be like the fans you put on the bottom of your case to blow into your GPU, so a lot like the fans on the Fractal Design Torrent, or if you're in an inverted case, it would be the top fans blowing directly into your GPU. Either way, that's the short throw distance, so the 6-inch mark would be the key data point you'd be looking at. The 9-inch mark is representative of a compact tower. Now, I don't know of one specifically, but I would say something like the Dell Optiplexes, so their business typecast computers, would be that short, a moderately short throw distance, something like that 9-inch mark. The 11-inch mark would be your standard mid-tower case, something like the Corsair Stormtrooper looking case, Corsair 550D from way back when, and of course the Fractal Meshify 2C, something along those lines. While the 14.5-inch measurement would be representative of a large tower, something like the Fractal Design Torrent. Those front fans would be like that 14.5-inch mark. The second thing you're getting out of this is how good is this fan at actually blowing air. So in an ideal world, the fan would lose no airspeed from the front of the case to the back of the case. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen due to some fans having a wide flow pattern where you'd see a rapid drop-off in airspeed, but you want it to be as gradual and as linear as possible. So basically, the flow pattern, what we don't want to see is down here, old style static pressure fans that just blasted air off to the sides and not much down the length of the case. Now, if you're hooking this up to a radiator or a fin stack for a CPU air cooler, it doesn't matter as much, but I'm a believer in you want as focused an airflow as possible to just blow the air through. But in a radiator or heatsink fin stack, the fins naturally help straighten out the airflow, so that flow coming out the other end of it will actually be pretty streamlined, and the air will naturally fill up all the spaces inside of it, so spreading it out. But I'm just a believer that you want as much airspeed going through it as possible, and if it generates great static pressure, that basically is the deciding factor at that point. So just having saying static pressure fans all blow out to the sides is kind of incorrect, and it's no longer true as fan designs have actually progressed. So the reason they slow down is because air around the fan is moving slower, or is not moving at all, and it kind of creates drag on the inner flow, and it just kind of slows it down over time. But I was going to say, if you're using these fans in a pull configuration on a heatsink fin stack or on a radiator, the flow pattern coming out the other side will look like as if it was in the open air. If you're going to use it as a push configuration, the flow gets strained out. So my opinion is, no matter what you're using this fan for, you want the air flowing into it to be as efficient as possible. So you might as well just get something good rather than something that is less versatile that blows air off to the sides. Now this is at 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100% pitot fan signaling, and of course I took data points at in between levels. But this gives you an overview of how the fan looks in performance overall. But we need to be able to compare it against something else in order to really deep dive and know how it's doing. So this teal line is my control fan. It is based 3 parts A12X25 to 1 part A14, making it a great blended fan to give me kind of the optimized performance range that I want to take a look at. Because in general, I found that 120mm class fans do better at the 6 and 9 inch marks, while 140mm class fans tend to do better at the 11 and 14.5 inch marks. And this is simply because a larger diameter fan more easily fills a space with air than a smaller diameter fan, compensating for, to some extent, for a wider flow pattern if it indeed has one. And if it's a more concentrated flow pattern, then it's going to do even better than a concentrated 120mm fan because of that larger radius. So that brief explanation there. So the Uni-Fan does okay, but you really want it to be closer to my control fan. So overall not that great. And then I included one other one, the Uni-Fan SL120 version 2. It did pretty poorly. Matter of fact, it drops off in air speed pretty significantly, like very quickly. At 11 inches, it's basically not moving any air by itself. If, again, stacking multiple fans together, you'd actually get some airflow, and the other fans in your case will draw the air, so you wouldn't actually be completely static. But this is assuming just like simplified factors. At 100% pitot fan signaling, the Uni-Fan SL-INF does okay. It meets my control fan before dropping off at the 14.5 inch mark, so I'd put it as okay, not good, but okay. The SL-INF version, or not Infinity, SL120 version 2, on the other hand, is a pretty poor performer overall. And how do they compare against other fans? So again, you want to pay attention to the data point that represents your case that you're going to be putting these fans into, and if you don't know what case you're going to be getting, well, then you might as well just optimize for the biggest case. Right here in this orange line is the SL-INF. Right here is the SL120 version 2. So right away, we can pretty much see that the SL120 version 2 it starts off well, but it doesn't hold its ground. It's not good. While the Uni-Fan Infinity actually, I mean, it's not good. So I consider this right here, this line. So this is for the Wonder Snail. This I consider the bottom end of what I would call a good fan, and that's simply because it is so good at the 14.5 inch mark. It actually is the middle of the pack there. While the red line is the Silent Wings 4 Pro. It starts off quite well, again, noise normalized results, and then drops off steadily. So the Wonder Snail is the bottom end of what I consider to be a good fan, and the SL-INF, depending on what data point you're looking at, is either good or okay, but you're basically buying it for the aesthetic. At 100% pitot fan signaling, well, the data points hold true and their positioning remains consistent. They're at the bottom end of kind of good fans, except for the SL120. It's pretty bad, actually. Next up, we have the 9-inch mark, air speed versus decibels. So the 9-inch mark was chosen because it's where fans tended to drop off the hardest. Now, not all fans, but the majority of fans, when they dropped off at the 9-inch mark. And once air speeds get under 0.5 meters per second, my anemometer becomes less consistent at being able to get good readings out of it. So I need to pick where I consider airspeeds to be high enough to actually get reasonable data. So the 9-inch mark, Uni-Fan SL120 version 2, because it's a data point, basically gains no airspeed for lots of noise. The Infinity, on the other hand, does okay, but it's a far cry away from the better performing fans up here. Base airflow testing would be done at each of the different markers for a given amount of time for the blade to reach steady state with the fan at the end. Next up is performance through my CPU air cooler. On the left side, we have airspeed versus RPM. On the right side, we have airspeed versus noise. In both these two graphs, better performing fans are going to be sitting top left, worse performing fans are going to be sitting bottom right. And okay, let's focus on the left one. Again, this airspeed through my cooler, the U12A. So the left one is basically a blade efficiencies. How much air is this blade design able to push at a given RPM? So you want the RPM to be as low as possible while the airspeed is as high as possible. So all of that said, my control fan is this blue line, the SL120 is the yellow, and the Uni-Fan Infinity is the red. All the fans at lower RPMs are underperforming compared to my control fan, but as RPM increases, they either match or exceed it by a little bit. But how do things look at in noise performance? Well, my control fan is here in blue, and the Infinity starts off a little bit better than it at lower RPMs, but again, it's not producing as much air at that given RPM. And then it kind of is bouncing around close to my control fan, but overall I could say it's a little bit under. The SL120 is a bit under it overall. Now, how do these fans compare against other fans I have tested? And this is a small sample sub-selection for representing different groupings, so good, better, best, okay, poor performing. And a little note about this key over here, I did a series of tests, and there's a video up on my channel if you're curious about watching it, where I I ran a CPU only load, let it go to thermal max, had my anemometer on the back of the cooler, and adjusted the PWM fan signal, let the system stabilize at a particular wattage, get the temperature, or get readings, clock speeds, wattages, and the airspeed, so I could equate an airspeed to a wattage. Now, my CPU is the 11700K, so if you don't have that same CPU, and you don't have the Noctua U12A, how can you use this data? Well, you can use it as a comparative point. Now, you can't use these direct wattages, because if you notice, like every 0.2 meters per second of air, in general, you get an increase in wattage by like 20 watts until you start getting really high up there, and then the gains are much smaller. But this isn't going to line up with every cooler. So again, how can you use this data? Well, if you have the Noctua F12, you're moving 0.5 meters per second at my noise level, or my noise normalized level of 12 decibels by my readings. So if you upgrade to the Noctua A12X25, you're now going to be pushing 1.3 meters per second of air. So that is a huge improvement in air speed going through your cooler. Now, how much wattage improvement is that going to be? I can't say for certain without knowing more about your system and testing more coolers, or even radiators. I want to get into radiator testing and need to acquire a good one. But what it means is you're going to be able to draw a higher wattage for the same noise level, or if you've got a locked CPU, you can run your system will run cooler, or you can take this extra overhead back off your PWM fan signal, and now your system runs even quieter. So how do the two fans that we're talking about in this video compare? Well, the SL120 Infinity does pretty darn well. It's just a hair behind the Noctua A12X25. The Uni-Fan SL120V2, on the other hand, is a little bit on the low side So again, that one you're basically buying pure for looks. How are things looking at 100% PW fan signaling? Well, they're looking overall pretty good. So the A12X25 is right here moving 1.9 meters per second of air. So the Infinity actually matches the A12X25 just at a little bit higher noise level, while the SL120V2 is significantly noisier. Like, it's on the same level of noise as some of the noisiest fans I've tested. So it's not that far behind the T30. And as a note, noise does not scale linearly. It's every 10 decibels is a doubling in noise volume. So a 23 decibel fan versus a 32, that's almost 10 decibels. So that means the SL120V2 is almost twice as loud as the Infinity. So you might see linear lines in here. They're not actually linear because, again, every 10 decibels is a double in noise value. So the SL120V2 kind of gains a lot of performance and then it kind of flattens out very significantly, while the Infinity has like these jump ups of gaining a lot of efficiency, then leveling out, gaining efficiency, and then leveling out. So it's kind of interesting in that regard. So depending on where it is on its RPM curve, it's either quite good or pretty terrible. Just unfortunate to see that with its design. Well, we did this once. We'll do it again real quick. This is the open box. It comes with some great padding to keep the fan nice and safe. And here we got some screws. Comes with your cable and Lian-Li's attachment bracket system. So it'll attach pads right there in the middle to the metal spikes right here at the end. And this just sort of slides in place and you lock it forward. Now, one thing to be aware of, this adds extra thickness to your fan. Now, you're going to have it situated this way where that's the end. So depending on how your case is set up, how tight your clearances are, this may interfere with other things in your case. So it's just something to be extra aware of in your particular case. Also, this is a thicker frame, meaning wider. So it's just inherently harder to fit into a place. All that said, it's got some nice rubber pads around the side, which will help reduce vibrations. The struts in here are nice and thin and nicely angled, so they won't obstruct the airflow very much, which is great for performance, meaning that it won't obstruct performance at all in this standard thickness fan. As far as other things about the frame, the squared off design means that you can stack them together, the three of them together, and it'll create a nice pressure seal on your radiator so that all the air will be shoved through it. So the fact that this central fan blade is actually smaller than average because it's got such a thick frame matters less in a radiator, but matters a lot more in airflow. So if it's a case fan, the smaller blades mean that it won't be able to push as much air, and in your heatsink on like a air cooler, it'll matter more because they need more airflow. Well, when you put this on a radiator, you seal up around it, and the back pressure from the radiator, it generally has to work harder to push the air through it. That pressure spreads the air out, so that's why it doesn't matter quite as much. But in terms of the fan blades, from my first review, pretty much holds true. They're semi-hybrid, but they're definitely more like a pressure-oriented fan blade. As they're wide, they've got a pretty good amount of overlap. But I say hybrid because they have a good amount of curvature on the front. And pretty well arced going to the back, creating a nice arc shape. But pretty much like I said before, the fan blades themselves are pretty unremarkable, pretty basic overall. And there's a lot that Lian-Li would be able to improve in their fan blade design to really get the max amount of performance possible. But appearance is king for them. Let's jump and take a look at the RGB. I counted 8 RGB LEDs on the central ring of the fan hub. So 8 is a much better number than more value-oriented RGB fans, which usually appear to have 6. 8 allows for better color mixing, and I'm going to go ahead and make it do rainbow colors. There we are. So it has a better, smoother transitions than most other fans that have only 6 LED RGBs, and that's because you can have more light sources so that you can have that more in-between color between the two, so that there's just more opportunity to blend the colors together, which I do prefer, but if it's worth the extra cost, that is up to you to decide, and I can't make that decision for you. As for the frame itself, it does have a nice diffusers in here. I can't actually count how many LED RGBs or RGB LEDs are in there. It's just too hard to really tell. That's just how good the diffuser is. And of course, the piece de resistance for this fan is the infinity mirror, which on camera does not do it justice, but it truly looks fantastic. I'm going to put it back onto a solid color, and it just absolutely is the most stunning thing ever in a fan. Truly, Lian-Li went over the top with this one, with that design. Unfortunately, the fan blade just doesn't keep up with all the aesthetics. So even the back of the fan looks fantastic. The central ring, the metal hub, basically, the light diffusers around the edge. So even though it does have these posts there, it still looks pretty good from the back, but definitely better from the front. But pretty much other than that, the infinity mirror is also in the central hub. I think I forgot to mention that. And it basically is probably the best looking fan on the market in terms of the LED RGB. And it's pretty much how I compare all the other fans up against it. But do you prefer more subtle effects? Or do you prefer to be more over the top? That's really up to you. And I really haven't decided where I fit, so I'll just let it run, let you all decide what you think, because, well, it's your decision, it's how you spend your money. So let's jump to the value proposition and see if I can help you make your decision. Next up, we have my CFM testing. So I'm not a huge fan of CFM testing in the way a lot of other reviewers use it. So CFM is just cubic feet per minute. If you don't know the calculation, so you use a tube. If yours is a square, it's a different calculation, but mine a circle. So pi r squared. So let's say r is in feet, so that's feet squared. And then we have airspeed. Let's put it in feet per minute. So that's feet per minute times feet squared. So that becomes feet cubed per minute, or cubic feet per minute. It's a volume of air per minute. Now, the reason I don't like the test for measuring how good a fan is for case cooling is when you put the fan in a tube. So this isn't a good representation. My fan is actually the exact size of the tube, which is how most reviewers do it. There is no room for this air to spread out, meaning it hides the fact that a poor performing fan that isn't good at focusing the airflow has nowhere else to push the air, so it's all going to travel down the tube anyways. While in my case simulation test, and as far as I know I'm the only one who does this, the air has room to spread out. So in other words, the CFM test, the fans are going to look a lot closer in performance. You're going to end up at the right result, but two fans will look much closer in performance to each other than they actually are, which is the problem. Because you may buy a fan going, well, that's adequate. I think that's fine. I like the aesthetic. When in reality, it's going to not perform the way you want it to, and you're going to potentially be unhappy with your system. Now, case cooling is sort of a funny thing. So you're going to notice more performance difference in your air cooler and in your GPU temperatures than you are in your actual VRM temperatures, your memory temperature, your other temperature sensors on your motherboard. Those are not going to change as much with the extra airflow going through your case, but you're going to notice it with an air cooler and your GPU if they're air cooled. In a radiator cooled system, then you're going to be using the data from the previous test, where it's the performance for the CPU air cooler. Now, where is CFM testing actually usable and adequate and good to use? Well, if you want to make your own at-home wind tunnel, very valid. You may want flow strainers in here though, to smooth out the airflow. If you want to generate PQ curves, so you have pressure sensors, a pitot-static tube, Some of the stuff you would have a little slit or opening of varying sizes, and you'd be able to tell how much static pressure the fan was generating for a given hole size, and then airflow going through it, and you basically just generate this data. Very simplified way of explaining that. If you want me to go into more detail, leave me questions in the comment section down below. I actually do have a master's in fluid mechanics, so that's why I'm doing these videos. If you want to measure your total airflow, so air volume going through CPU or cooler, it's basically the exact same as air speed. You're just changing the units to volume. Or if you want to measure the total volume of air your case is able to flush out of it per minute. So you would basically just hook up an anemometer to the exit of your case, and you'd measure the airspeed leaving it. You could also do it with the front. Airspeed going in, airspeed going out, and you get your case's total volumetric flow rate. Hooray! But anyways, let's get into these graphs. So RPM versus CFM is the exact same type of graph as the through the cooler. Better fans top left, worse fans bottom right. And no surprise, they all line up near on perfectly with my control fan. So this is proving my point that it's hiding the fact that the Uni-Fan SL120 is a terrible choice as a case fan, but it looks like it is. I do want to note I want to upgrade my CFM testing apparatus. Right now it's a 4-inch tube. I want to get a larger tube because that actually makes it more in line with a true CFM test. I also want to get a more cone-shaped one, so add a second test to it, where it would be able to hold up to 180 millimeter class fan. So it'd still give room for the air to spread out, but not in the same way as my case simulation test. It would just add a whole nother test to my test suite to, well, make things more interesting. Going back to these graphs, noise versus CFM, the Uni-Fan Infinity is a little bit better, except we're at higher RPMs than my control fan. The SL120V2 is underneath my control fan. Okay, so how do they do compared to other fans? Well, in noise normalized testing, the Infinity is at the top of the graph. It's doing really quite well. The SL120V2, on the other hand, is sitting kind of low towards the bottom. How are things looking at 100% PWM fan signaling? Well, the Infinity is lined up very closely with the A12X25, which is great to see. Unfortunately, though, it is still noisier, while the Uni-Fan SL120V2 is noisy and not pushing as much air. So overall, not great there. And then we have CFM versus decibel range, and it looks very similar to the graphs for the airspeed, where through the cooler, where the Uni-Fan Infinity is kind of bouncing between good or okay and good, where these like it hits an efficiency and then it levels out, hits another efficiency and levels out, while the SL120V2 kind of climbs nicely and then it flattens out. Now we're on to the value proposition. So first up, the Infinity is a $35 fan and the SL120V2 is a $30 fan. And this is standard retail pricing that I could find for the fan. So sale prices will adjust the value proposition, but all these fans are based off of the standard retail price to keep everything consistent. So the value proposition is a real simple calculation. It's performance per dollar. So you just have the airspeed divided by money. And on all the graphs, you're going to have the noise normalized on the left side and 100% PWM signaling on the right side. And who are these graphs specifically for? Well, if you're on an ultra-tight budget, so money is everything, or the most limiting factor, you want to get the absolute best bang for your buck. So you want to get the fan that ranks the best. Now, this isn't pure performance. Again, performance per dollar. So if a fan is cheap enough, it can look significantly better than other fans that are actually better blowing air, but are just more expensive. So if you have a little bit of extra budget to spend on getting nicer fans, I would use this data and compare it to the earlier graphs to determine which fan hits the best ratio for you. Meaning the TLG12 actually is a great performing fan. So there's a reason why it's the top performer for so long. I haven't come across one that's better than it basically in a lot of scenarios, because it actually pushes reasonable air and is cheap. So, but it's up to you to determine which ratio is the best for you. As for the SL Infinity and the SL120V2, they're both very much towards the bottom of the barrel, and it's very simple. They are so expensive for how little air they actually push. At the 11-inch mark, the SL120V2 is pretty much a DNE. Did not, well, no, DNF. Did not finish. The SL Infinity, on the other hand, is bottom of the graphs. It's not great. And same is true at the 100% pitot fan signaling mark. Through the CPU air cooler, kind of the story is the same. They're at the bottom of the graphs. And in the CFM, bottom of the graphs. So that leads me to, who are these fans for? Well, they're basically for your infinite budget guys, or people who are only looking for aesthetic. The Infinity is actually the better choice of the two, in my opinion. It's the one I would get if I were to purchase one of these fans. I think it's pretty, it's excellent, but like I don't know what to say. I'm pausing, but neither of them are great performing fans for the money. So if you're on a budget, get something else. If you want a little bit of RGB, get something else, unless you're fixated on these fans' particular RGB. I would just go with something else. Well, let's go to my wrap-up section for the video. And at the end of every video, I like to show off my raw data. If you're going to use it for your own personal use, you are more than welcome to do so. I do ask that if you're going to use it in any sort of video, publication, or journal, that you do reference me and my channel. I'm the one who generated this data, and this data does belong to me. But you are welcome to make your own graphs if you want to do so for yourself, so that you don't have to reference my video every single time you want to know how one fan compares to each other. So that's why I just present it. If there are particular fans you want to see me test in the future, please leave it in the comment sections down below. I do spend my time and read through them. If you've got questions about testing methodology or what are my thoughts on fans, I'll be happy to answer them. If you have constructive criticism for me on how I can improve my videos to make them more pleasant to watch, better flow, timelines, whatever, certainly leave it down below. I will read it and I'll try to implement it into future videos. Just know that it does take me time to get through it, because I tend to do videos in large groupings, which means I film a whole lot and then take time editing through it. So I may not get to adding in your improvements to the video until the next round, basically. So all of that said, please hit that subscribe button if you like my video. Join me on Patreon. It would really go a long way in helping me get to the next level of testing to compete with the bigger channels. They are not aerospace engineers like I am. I actually have a fundamental understanding of fans and blowing it and how they blow air. So I appreciate the support, and I hope to see you next time here on Computer Tech and More.